I was on my knees in the living room, folding my life into cardboard boxes. The tape stuck to my fingers, pulling skin every time I tore a strip free. I didn't rush it. Shirts folded clean, jeans stacked square, every movement deliberate, like if I stayed precise enough, I wouldn't feel what was happening. Emily sat on the kitchen island with a glass of Prosecco, one leg crossed over the other. The pendant lights caught the glass just right, turning it into something celebratory. She watched me the way someone watches movers, present, detached, already imagining the room empty. She was smiling, not a cruel smile, not even a triumphant one. It was softer than that. Relieved, like a long inconvenience had finally resolved itself. I slid a framed photo into packing paper without looking at it. I already knew what it showed, as on a beach years ago, arms around each other, pretending the future was settled. The paper crinkled loud in the quiet house. "Make sure you don't forget the cords," she said casually. "You always forget the cords." I nodded once and reached behind the TV stand. The ceiling fan clicked overhead, that loose rhythm I'd meant to fix. Funny what never feels urgent until it's irrelevant. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to stop watching me. I didn't ask her anything at all. That was the moment it became clear. For her, this was the end of the story. The cleanup scene. The part where the credits roll. For me, it was something else entirely. Not heartbreak. Not shock. A clean internal shift. Like a line had appeared on the floor and I knew, without thinking, that I would never step back over it. I sealed another box and wrote my name on the side. Just my name. No R's. No room label. Ownership had narrowed. The house looked the same as it always had. The furniture in place, the counters wiped down, the faint smell of lemon cleaner still hanging in the air. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was a boundary. I stood up slowly, my knees aching, and took a breath that felt unfamiliar in my chest. Calm. Empty. Final. This wasn't a fight. It was a point of no return. And once I recognized that, everything else stopped mattering. Before that day, our life looked stable from the outside. 12 years of marriage. A 4-bedroom house in Plano, Texas. The kind of place built for families who planned to stay put. Same neighbors for years. Same grocery store. Same commute. We weren't flashy, but nothing about us suggested collapse. If someone had asked, I would have said we were fine. Maybe not exciting. Maybe not passionate. But fine. I handled the finances because that's how it had always been. Bills, mortgage, insurance, retirement accounts. I kept it organized, predictable, quiet. Emily handled the atmosphere. She decided what the house felt like when it was warm, when it was tense, when it was light enough to laugh. That division worked for a long time. Or at least, it didn't fail loudly. Our days ran on routine. I woke early, same alarm, same shower, same coffee mug. Work filled the daylight hours, steady and demanding but familiar. Evenings were dinner, television, small talk about things that didn't matter much. We went to bed at roughly the same time, backs sometimes touching, sometimes not. I didn't think much of it. Long marriages settle. That's what people say. We had been living on autopilot longer than I realized. The signs were there, but they were subtle enough to ignore if you wanted to. Late nights that came with ready explanations. New habits that arrived without discussion. Her phone always close, screen always angled away. A shift in her voice when she talked about certain names, certain plans. Nothing explosive, just altered. She started dressing differently for errands that used to take 10 minutes. Started leaving earlier, coming back with energy she didn't bring home anymore. When I asked, she had answers prepared, reasonable, smooth, rehearsed. I accepted them because accepting them required the least disruption. There were moments I noticed and dismissed almost immediately. A laugh that didn't match the conversation. A confidence that hadn't been there before. A distance that felt intentional but wasn't hostile. Each time, I told myself the same thing: don't overthink it. I believed the version of life that was easiest to accept. We still hosted holidays. Still smiled in photos. Still talked about future plans in vague terms. The house stayed clean. The accounts stayed balanced. Nothing collapsed on paper. That's how it hid so well. Looking back, the stability wasn't real, it was maintained. Actively. Carefully. By both of us, for different reasons. I thought consistency meant safety. What it really meant was that I wasn't paying attention to what consistency was costing me. There was no dramatic confrontation that forced clarity on me. No argument that ended with raised voices or slammed doors. Nothing exploded. What happened instead was quieter, and because of that, more permanent. One morning I realized I had stopped explaining things to myself. It wasn't a decision I announced internally. It didn't come with resolve or anger. It felt more like fatigue. A specific kind. The kind that comes from carrying a story that no longer fits the evidence. I was tired of adjusting facts to preserve comfort. I noticed how often her explanations arrived before my questions. How certain topics were deflected instead of answered. How the same phrases repeated themselves with small variations, like they'd been practiced. Patterns don't need to be loud to be undeniable. They just need to be consistent. At first, I still tried to soften what I was seeing. I told myself I was misreading tone, projecting stress, letting imagination do damage where none existed. That instinct didn't disappear all at once. It faded, slowly. Each time it returned, it felt weaker. One evening, she was talking about her day, and I realized I wasn't listening to understand anymore. I was listening for structure. For alignment. For what matched what had already been said before. When something didn't line up, I didn't react. I noted it, quietly. That was new. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt in a clear way. What I felt was distance, from my own excuses. The version of reality I'd been maintaining started to feel fragile, like it required effort I no longer wanted to give. I began to see the difference between coincidence and repetition, between generosity and avoidance, between trust and willful blindness. Once those distinctions sharpen, you don't get to blur them again without knowing you're lying. I didn't change my behavior. Not outwardly. I still asked how her day was. Still nodded at the right moments. Still filled the same roles. But internally, something had shifted direction. I wasn't waiting for reassurance anymore. I wasn't looking for proof. I was done lying to myself. And once that happened, time stopped feeling urgent. I accepted the reality quietly. There wasn't a night where I sat alone and said the words out loud. No mirror conversation. No dramatic internal speech. Acceptance came the same way the earlier realizations had, incrementally, without ceremony. One thought at a time, settling into place until there was nothing left to argue with. I didn't try to save the marriage. That surprises people when they hear it later. They expect desperation first, bargaining, some attempt to pull things back from the edge. But by the time I reached acceptance, I already understood something important. Whatever this was, it wasn't mutual anymore. And saving something alone isn't saving it at all. I didn't ask why, not because I didn't care, but because the answer wouldn't change anything that mattered. Explanations don't reverse choices, they only decorate them. I wasn't interested in decoration. Outwardly, nothing changed. I stayed calm, agreeable, predictable. I didn't withdraw affection abruptly or turn cold. I didn't become suspicious in ways that would alert her. If anything, I became easier to live with. Less reactive, less demanding. That wasn't strategy at first. It was instinct. Noise felt unnecessary. Inside, though, I stopped moving emotionally. I no longer reached for reassurance. I no longer invested energy in aligning us. The internal work I'd been doing for years, adjusting expectations, smoothing over tension, absorbing discomfort, simply ended. Not angrily, cleanly. I began to separate my thoughts from my actions. What I felt didn't need to be expressed. What I knew didn't need to be announced. I understood that emotion, once revealed too early, becomes leverage for someone else. So I kept it contained. Observed. Controlled. There was a strange calm in that decision. Not peace, exactly, but clarity. I started thinking in terms of movement instead of repair. What could shift quietly? What needed to stay stable for now? What information mattered and what didn't? Urgency disappeared. I wasn't racing toward confrontation or resolution. I wasn't trying to catch anything. Time no longer felt like an enemy. If anything, it felt like an asset. The more consistent I stayed, the more the situation revealed itself without interference. I understood then that this wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about being right. It was about exiting something without chaos, without giving away control I couldn't get back. So I stayed the same man on the surface. And underneath, I began moving differently. I started watching instead of reacting. That shift changed everything. When you stop trying to influence outcomes, details surface on their own. I listened to her words without responding to their intent. I noted what repeated, what arrived prepackaged, what never changed no matter the context. The same explanations, the same timelines, the same names delivered casually, as if repetition could dull their weight. I paid attention to rhythms. When she left, When she returned, how energy entered the room with her and how little of it stayed. Confidence has a texture when it's borrowed. It doesn't settle, it performs. I noticed that too. Logan appeared gradually, which is how names that matter usually do. At first, he was a solution. A guy from work who knew someone. Someone who'd already handled things I was still being told about. His name came up often enough to feel useful, but never important. That balance didn't hold. Soon he had an answer for everything. Contractors, scheduling, advice, opinions offered before questions were finished. His presence grew without announcement. I didn't object. I didn't compete. I let the expansion continue. I noticed how her posture changed when his name came up. How quickly she defended him when there was no criticism. How familiar became comfortable, and comfortable became assumed. None of it was dramatic. It didn't need to be. Facts accumulated quietly. Receipts appeared where explanations lagged. Time gaps widened just enough to notice. Stories aligned too cleanly, like they'd been smoothed over ahead of time. I didn't rush to confirm anything. I didn't need to. Consistency does the work if you let it. I stayed steady, predictable, unthreatening. Time stopped feeling scarce. I wasn't chasing truth anymore. I was letting it surface at its own pace. There's no advantage in interrupting a pattern before it finishes revealing itself. By then, I understood something simple. Once you stop reacting, people show you exactly how far they think they can go. I let her show me. The situation stopped being just about us. That realization came quietly, the same way everything else had. One day I was thinking about conversations and timelines, and the next I was looking at documents, numbers, obligations that didn't care about feelings. Once lawyers enter the edges of a situation, emotion becomes background noise. I didn't announce that shift. I didn't need to. I started making calls that had nothing to do with fixing anything. Short conversations, neutral questions, hypotheticals framed as curiosity. I listened more than I spoke. Took notes I never left out. Paper has a way of stripping romance out of decisions. The house stopped feeling symbolic and started feeling conditional. Equity, exposure, risk, timelines. What once represented stability revealed itself as a liability with an expiration date. The walls didn't change, but my understanding of them did. Emily didn't notice the transition. She thought things were moving in her favor. That assumption made her careless. Confidence has weight, and she carried it openly. So did Logan. He began showing up more, not physically at first, but in influence. Suggestions became expectations. Plans became assumptions. He spoke as though outcomes were already settled. I didn't interrupt that momentum. What had been private started bleeding outward. Scheduling conflicts affected work. Decisions touched accounts beyond ours. Third parties began operating on incomplete information, believing they were positioned well. They weren't wrong for thinking that. They were wrong for thinking I wasn't aware. Lawyers don't rush. Neither do systems. Once something is in motion, it doesn't need encouragement. It just needs space. I stayed quiet and let gravity do what it does. I watched how confidence changed when it wasn't questioned. How advice hardened into certainty. How people who think they're winning stop checking their footing. That's when things become fragile. By then, this wasn't personal anymore. It was structural. And structures fail not from force, but from imbalance left unattended for too long. The divorce moved quickly. Not because of urgency, but because there was nothing left to negotiate emotionally. I spoke very little throughout the process. When questions came, I answered them plainly. No commentary. No reframing. Silence does more work than argument ever could. Emily did most of the talking. She always had. She presented plans, assumptions, outcomes as if they were already agreed upon. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. Letting someone hear themselves uninterrupted is often enough. When she said she wanted to keep the house, she framed it like a test. There was a pause afterward, just long enough for resistance to appear if it was going to. She expected negotiation, a counter, maybe even a fight. I agreed without resistance. That surprised her. I could see it register in real time, the relief first, then the confidence. Agreement validated the story she'd been telling herself. That the house was hers. That I was stepping aside because I'd lost, not because I'd chosen to. I didn't explain myself. There's a moment when people mistake silence for weakness. It makes them comfortable. It reassures them. She settled into that comfort quickly. Started talking about renovations, about timelines, about what she'd do once everything was finalized. I nodded when appropriate, said nothing when it wasn't. I didn't return to old roles. I didn't remind her of what I'd handled. I didn't correct assumptions about finances or obligations. I let paperwork speak where words would have complicated things. Agreements were signed. Assets divided. The structure locked in place. Logan appeared confident during that phase. He spoke with certainty when asked, even when he wasn't asked. He treated the outcome like a victory lap already completed. I let that stand. Momentum favors those who don't disrupt it. By the time everything was finalized, Emily believed the hardest part was behind her. That the house was proof she'd landed on her feet. That my quiet meant acceptance. She wasn't entirely wrong. I had accepted something, just not what she thought. After that, I stepped aside. Not physically at first. I was still present in the process when required, still reachable, still compliant. But I stopped influencing anything. Decisions moved forward without my input, and I didn't correct their trajectory. I understood by then that interference would only slow what was already resolving itself. The process continued on its own. Warnings surfaced naturally. Professionals offered cautious advice. Questions were raised about timing, affordability, long-term exposure. Each one was dismissed with confidence. Optimism replaced diligence. Certainty filled the gaps where verification should have lived. I wasn't steering anymore. That was the difference. When you remove resistance, momentum accelerates. Emily leaned into that acceleration. So did Logan. They trusted their read of the situation. Trusted their narrative. Trusted that what looked stable would remain that way. I let it. There's a point where stepping back isn't avoidance, it's precision. Any further involvement from me would have been unnecessary. The structure was already stressed. All it needed was continued weight in the wrong places. I focused on my own logistics. Clean exits. Clear boundaries. No shared dependencies that weren't already defined. I simplified. Reduced. Detached. Not emotionally, practically. That's where leverage actually lives. Communication dwindled to necessities. Short messages. Neutral tone. No reaction. Silence where commentary used to be. That absence encouraged assumptions. People tend to fill quiet with whatever version of reality benefits them most. They filled it eagerly. Advice was ignored. Risk was reframed as opportunity. Confidence grew where caution should have lived. I watched it happen without satisfaction or frustration. Observation doesn't require either. I wasn't waiting for a collapse. I was letting a process finish. When you stop intervening, outcomes reveal whether they were sustainable to begin with. Some things don't fail immediately. They weaken first. They show strain. They ask for adjustment. No adjustment came. And by the time the weight shifted fully, there was nothing left for me to do but remain exactly where I was, outside the arc of impact. Still, prepared, uninvolved. I didn't cause what followed. I just didn't prevent it. When the moment arrived, it didn't feel dramatic. There was no buildup, no warning surge of adrenaline. It came the way consequences usually do, through a phone call placed too late, with a voice already carrying panic. I was at my desk, reviewing something unrelated, when my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring once longer than necessary before answering. Her words came fast. Accusations first, then fear, then the request hidden inside the noise. I listened without interrupting. People reveal priorities when pressure compresses time. Nothing she said surprised me. I had already seen the numbers. Already understood the sequence. What she was experiencing wasn't betrayal or unfairness. It was gravity reasserting itself after being ignored for too long. I didn't explain that. Explanations would have sounded like justification. When she paused, waiting for me to fix something, I didn't step in. I told her I was sorry she was dealing with it. That was true. I told her I couldn't help. That was also true. I kept my voice level. Familiar. Unavailable. The panic shifted quickly into blame. Then into anger. Then into bargaining. I stayed still through all of it. I wasn't detached, I was finished. There's a difference. Logan's name came up, sharp and defensive. I didn't respond to that either. Whatever arrangement they had built together was theirs to manage. My involvement had ended long before this call. When she realized I wasn't going to re-enter the situation, her tone changed again. Quieter. Smaller. That was the point where the reality finally landed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt exactly what I'd expected to feel, nothing urgent. The outcome matched the structure that led to it. There was no mystery left to resolve. After the call ended, I sat where I was for a moment and let the silence return. No shaking. No release. Just confirmation. I closed the file I'd been working on and moved on to the next task. Some endings don't need acknowledgement. They just need to be accepted. Today, I live somewhere else. Not far, but far enough that nothing echoes. Different walls. Different light. A place that doesn't hold conversations in the corners or memories in the floors. It's quiet in a way that feels earned, not empty. I didn't take much with me. What mattered fit easily. What didn't was never really mine to begin with. Emily believed the house was her victory. She said it outright once, without realizing what she was admitting. That it proved she'd landed on her feet. That it showed she'd come out ahead. I didn't correct her. People deserve the comfort of the stories they choose, especially when those stories are already doing the work of closure. I let her take it. What I kept wasn't visible. It doesn't show up on paper or in photos. It shows up in mornings that start without tension. In decisions that don't require negotiation. In the absence of vigilance. There are no shadows here. No routines built around someone else's moods. No need to monitor tone or timing. Just space. Just forward motion. I don't replay what happened. I don't revise it. It unfolded exactly as it needed to. I stepped away when it mattered, and I didn't step back in when it was tempting. That's the part people misunderstand. Walking away wasn't loss. It was selection. I didn't keep the house. I kept my future.